So a live look at Joint Base Andrews, where moments from now, President Trump will travel to Alaska for that critical summit with Vladimir Putin. Now, the president just now posting 2 words, high stakes, on Truth Social as he heads out. The meeting comes just days after Russia made a push for battlefield advantage, its forces moving several miles into Ukrainian-held territory in the east. It's still under 20% of the country. Here to react is retired 4-star general, Fox News senior strategic analyst, General Jack Keane. General, what do you think the president's mindset is? What do you think is going to happen today?
Well, I think a couple things. One, certainly he would like to have a positive outcome here. 2, he recognizes that, this is Putin's initiative. He called for the meeting. And I think the president is very much aware of what's behind that motivation. It's pretty clear Putin wants to avoid the tariffs and the sanctions. And that's why he wants to have the meeting. And he's going to come into that meeting, as in all of the phone conversations, Brian, he doesn't want to lose the relationship he has with the president and the relationship he has with the United States now as a result of it. So he's always going to expand the conversations as he's done in the phone calls. The economic benefits of our relationship, space exploration. Now he's added another one that he's likely going to bring up in terms of diminishing strategic nuclear weapons and potential getting back to a disarmament agreement, which, the Russians have walked away from. So that's always part of the narrative here. But, Brian, at the end of the day, there are just opposing strategic objectives here. Putin wants to take control of Ukraine and expand the Russian Empire into Eastern Europe. That is his strategic objective, and he knows the United States and the West are opposed to that. And what does President Trump want? He wants an end to this war. But Putin, the means to accomplish his ends, his strategic goals, is the war itself. So he unlikely wants to move towards any ceasefire and an end-of-war discussion. And some evidence of that is, remember, he threw out early in the week, okay, I'm willing to talk about a ceasefire if you give up the most critical piece of terrain that I've been trying to take for 2 years and haven't even come close to doing it. And I started trying to take it in 2014. That is the Donetsk fortress belt that he's been trying to after. And he threw that out there, knowing how impossible that would be for the Ukrainians to say, sure, we'll give that up after 2 years of you failing to achieve it on the battlefield. So, yeah, I think there's significant strategic opposition here in terms of Putin's goals and the president's goals. But I give the president some credit. Putin wants to talk. Is there a possibility of achieving those goals? I'm willing to talk to him.
So, the thing is, General, there's so many different ways to look at this. For example, if he comes in there with his ridiculous demands that he's had in place for the last 2 years, and what you just said, the president listens to him and he says, okay, I know that you're not serious, so I'm going to be blowing off that lunch. I'm going to do my own press conference. You can do what you want after. And the sanctions are going to be on within 48 hours. After all, he gave him 10 days. And I believe the sanctions got his attention. And maybe it was India's call to say they're putting tariffs on me for buying your oil. China would be next, Turkey and Brazil. So if the president walks out and goes, he's not serious, he goes, I gave it a shot, in come the sanctions, and I'm going to give more, we're selling more military in exchange for drones. So in a way, the president walks out, he looks like a guy doing everything to stop the killing. At the same time, he's not abandoning Ukraine. In fact, he's fortifying it. It's going to make Russia's job harder. What do you think?
Well, the president, I think, is very much aware that he's got the hammer here, and he knows the reason for the meeting is because of that hammer. It's because of the tariffs and the sanctions that Putin wants to talk. So, Putin, Putin is a strategist here, and he's a manipulator. He'll likely make some concessions to the president, not anything like what the president wants. Why? Well, to extend the negotiations, to drag them on. That's buying time is part of one of his objectives here. But the president has the hammer, and he knows full well if he drops it, it's not the end. It's likely the beginning, in a way, because that will force Putin. It'll take some time for those things to hit. But listen, as a result of this summit, I know for myself, and I think for a lot of other analysts, we have found out a lot more about this Russian economy, and it is in much more serious trouble than we thought it was. We knew it was having some issues, but it's more significant. So that is also one of the reasons that is motivating Putin here. He really does want to avoid these tariffs and sanctions.
Well,
and if the president dropped them, then that doesn't end the process. It will likely bring Putin back into the process to make a much better deal than what he's willing to make at this time.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because Putin says, I need Iran. I don't care what I'll put our past behind him. So he does with Iran. He sees North Korea, that's a whack job guy, but he needs their resources, so he does a deal with them. He's willing to take a junior partnership with China, all for his best interests. My hope is he understands to not have an enemy in the U.S. would be in his best interest, but I don't think like a KGB agent. General, I look forward to talking to you over the weekend. I know you're going to be with me on Sunday on One Nation, so I appreciate that. And we'll watch your analysis today.
Yeah, great talking to you, Brian. Yeah, you and the team have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.